Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along to the first Imatta live and interactive. Yes, that's right, we're live this afternoon, and we're certainly going to be interactive. So if you have any burning questions during the course of the next seminar session, what I want you to do is just send them in live to us. We've got a point just at the end where we'll pick those questions up. But we do have quite a lot of content to get through in a fairly short time window. So let's get started, shall we? We're going to look today at finding balance, exploring what it means, what it looks like for you in your context. Because guess what? Your balance might be different to somebody else. My name's Aidan Kearney and I'm a chartered psychologist. So I lead us for this exploration of this important topic. But let's start at the beginning, shall we? It's usually the best place to start. So I'll give you a little bit about me. I said I'm a chartered psychologist, but what does that mean? Well, I've studied and applied psychology in a variety of settings for over 30 years. And if you know anything about psychologists, you know, yes, we're mind readers. So I'm looking at you down the lens of the camera now, and I know what you're thinking. My goodness, he's been studying psychology for over 30 years. He must have started when he was about 6 months old. Come on, get on board with my fragile self-esteem. No, I know. I do look that age. I started out studying and applying psychology, forensic psychology, and policing and investigatory settings. In the last 11 years, I've been working full-time as a chartered coach and psychologist, helping people understand, get to grips with, and manage the challenges that they encounter. Because guess what? Those challenges can create some of that imbalance that we might feel. So this afternoon, we're going to look at 3 simple ideas. We're going to look at human needs. We're going to look at what could create imbalance. And most importantly, we'll look at what can we do? How can we move forward? So let's get into our content, will we? I said that we're going to be interactive this afternoon. So here's our first point of interaction. I'm going to use a tool called Mentimeter today. Now, Mentimeter is fantastic because it allows us to respond live and most importantly, anonymously to the question that we see on the screen. And as you respond, I'll be able to show you the responses that are coming in. So if you've never used it before, please have your mobile device to hand. You can log into www.menti.com and when prompted to, enter the code 26862309 as you see at the bottom of the screen, or you can scan the QR code that we have on screen. What that'll allow us to do is respond live to this really simple question. Describe the ideal you in 3 words. Sounds simple, doesn't it? And actually, it seems pretty straightforward. But actually describing the ideal you, is it more complex than we might think? Does it take insight and understanding? I'll give you a couple more minutes just to log in. And what I'll do is I'll flip over to the Menti screen now and I'll see what's coming up. So we can see some of our words popping in already. Confident, loving, strong, calm, healthy, free. That's an interesting construct. What might that mean for the person who added that in? Happiness. Another interesting construct. Happiness deals with our emotions. But how do we get towards happiness? Actually, there's a behavioral pathway to move towards it, is there not? So I'll talk about that briefly towards the end in terms of what we can do. But what we can see is that there's some similarity around the room. There's some similarity in terms of the people who've logged on today. They may pick up on some of these words and say, yeah, that would describe the ideal me too. That idea of being calm. And as we see the responses accumulating on the screen, what we'll see is there is similarity, but there's also difference. The ideal version of the self isn't necessarily the same as the person next to you. What makes that person tick might be different. And that's really important when we're thinking about the idea of balance, because what's balance for one person is not necessarily balance for the next. And the idea of balance and imbalance can shift dependent upon our context. So it's really interesting when we look at some of the words, some of the language here: health, content, relaxed, stress-free. Is stress-free easy to achieve? Is it achievable? Interesting. We'll come back to all of this as we work through the rest of today's session. But for now, we'll come back in to our PowerPoint and explore a couple of ideas, things that can help us to become the ideal self. And when we look at that, when we look at the idea of being the ideal version of ourselves, it's important to know and important to think about what we need. So, to help us out with this, here's a really, really simple approach developed by Abraham Maslow back in the 50s. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But look just how many different types of needs we have. We've got the basic needs, the physiological needs, water and food. It's lunchtime. I'm eating into your lunch. I would suggest that you'll probably be only too happy to get away from the screen at some stage and have your salad, your sandwich, your soup, or whatever it is going to sate your hunger. We've got safety needs, security and safety. They're pretty obvious. Who doesn't like feeling safe and secure? But then it starts to become a bit more complex. We've got psychological needs, esteem needs, belonging needs, the idea of our intimate relationships and our friendships. And right at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, we've got this idea of self-actualization, becoming the person we want to be, being everything that we can be. Now, Maslow talked about deficit needs and growth needs. The reality is, if we cannot meet some of our basic needs, it creates a deficiency: sleep, food, safety, shelter. The other growth needs are all about this idea of becoming who we want to be. Yes, there's the idea of balance, but there's also the potential for imbalance within this. Now, some of the criticisms of Maslow's hierarchy were that, okay, well, you have to fulfill the basic needs before you move forward onto the higher level needs. Maslow himself actually answered this criticism and said, no, that's not right. And we all know we may have sacrificed food or sleep to look after the kids or to finish the project and work. So we can sacrifice one other need to fulfill another need. But that in itself can create imbalance for us. And it can also create stress, even when we want to be stress-free. So let me suggest just have a little thought process about the myriad needs, the myriad demands that you might have on you. They're probably more than you think. It might be things like work, family, friends, socializing, sport, leisure, household, charity, caring, all of these different needs vying for fulfillment. And here's the thing with stress, folks. One of the greatest producers of stress for a human being is the inability to fulfill those needs, or the perceived inability to fulfill those needs. So if there's any imbalance at all, how easy would it be to stay stress-free? Not that easy at all, would it be? And when we look at this, when we understand this reality, we see just how complex this idea of balance is. Because we live in a social world. We don't exist in isolation. And therefore, other people are going to make needs and demands of us as well. It's not just us trying to find that balance. We're working with other people, we're collaborating with other people for all kinds of different ends, whether it be through your sport, your family, your work. And for that, any of those scenarios has the potential to create some imbalance. So what I want you to do now, and what I'd ask you to do, is just reflect for a second. Of those various needs, and we'll look at them in a Menti screen in a minute, of those various needs, which might be creating an imbalance for you? And which are really, really critical for maintaining your balance? Do you know? Could you put your finger on it? Would you be able to identify where the imbalance is? Because here's the thing, to address any problem, we need to know that the problem exists in the first place. We may be feeling stress. We may not know why the stress is there. So building our knowledge of ourselves, being able to map out our world and our environment, being able to understand where the push and pull mechanisms actually occur, is really, really fundamental to supporting us having balance. And sometimes, just as we can see on the screen with our seesaw, the smaller aspect may be creating the greater pull. So it's important to know and to understand the dynamic, the fluid nature of all of the needs and demands on us on a daily basis. So hopefully you've had a chance to reflect very, very quickly on those couple of questions on the screen. What could create a balance issue for you? And where do you feel any imbalance right now? Let's test that out, shall we? What I want you to do is log back into our Menti screen. I'll move Menti on to the next question very shortly. And respond to where you feel any imbalance around the various aspects, the various dynamics that we looked at. So I'm going to jump back into our Menti screen and we'll populate that up and see what's showing up with the people on our facilitated workshop. Let's just bring this up, have a look at it, and see what people are responding to, shall we? So, what parts of your life are you feeling any imbalance in? We've got work, socializing, sport, charity, family, leisure, caring, friends, household, or other. Maybe there's something not on the list that you're feeling a pressure point around. What you can do is you can vote there with the little buttons and start to display, and we'll see on the screen where the levels of imbalance might sit. So we've got our first vote in there. Someone voting for family, feeling a little bit of push and pull in terms of the balance around their family life. Somebody is seeing a little bit of imbalance around work. Perhaps work's very busy at the minute. There are a lot of demands. Maybe you're feeling like you're pulled in 50 different directions. And as we see more votes coming in, we start to see similarities, but also difference around the room again. So we see with work and family and household that people are starting to feel a little bit of imbalance. What I would invite you to do, rather than getting caught up in trying to resolve that, start to identify what is it? What aspect of that work situation, of that family situation, household or caring, what aspect is showing up? How is it showing up? What is important there to you and why? We'll just wait and see if there's another couple of votes come in. We've had a few people responding. I know Menti might be difficult to get used to, but it's a great tool to give us an understanding when we look at the room, and it's a digital room, but a room nonetheless, to understand that perhaps we're not on our own. Maybe other people are experiencing similar things. But it also demonstrates when we're working in teams, when we're working with other people, they may have pressures that we don't fully get at the minute. They may be experiencing imbalances that we don't understand because we don't feel imbalance in that environment. So let's get back into our content, shall we? Let's look at a little bit more complexity Let's come back in to where we're at with our PowerPoint. Let's complicate things a little bit more, shall we? I've already talked about the difference between ourselves. Yes, similarity. We've seen it in our word cloud. The ideal self. There may be things you think, hey, that's just like me. Perhaps you're feeling pressure and imbalance in work or home or some other facet. And you think, I'm not my own. Other people are experiencing that too. Let's throw a couple of curveballs at that though. Because I want to introduce two concepts here. Self-concept and the idea of identity. Who are we? How do we understand ourselves? If we look at the construct of self-concept, there are three different components to it. Self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves and how we feel good about ourselves. Now, self-esteem is a really, really interesting one. Do we validate our self-esteem based upon our internal measures of how we're doing? Or do we look for external validation, external reinforcement from others to say, hey, you're doing a good job. Well done. Look at you. That's fantastic. And let's be honest, it feels good when other people give us positive feedback. But if we don't internalize our self-esteem, then our self-concept can be based on what other people say to us. The next aspect that we look at then is how we value ourselves. How do we measure that sense of value? And then connecting that with the ideal self. So when you looked at that ideal self, you're probably asking yourself, well, I want to be happy, I want to be stress-free, I want to feel confident, but I don't. I keep getting this sense of stress. There's this stuff I can't get away from. Why do I feel unconfident, lacking in confidence? Why do I feel sad sometimes? Here's the rub. It's perfectly normal as a human being to experience all of these things. And they are a normal part of our existence. To complicate things a little bit more, let's think about our identity. How do you describe yourself? What does that mean? Does that description change based on where you see yourself in life? Whether through occupation, through your family? How do you describe yourself in the various different domains of life that you inhabit? What does that mean for the role that you have and how you perceive yourself, how you grade yourself against your expectations of what that identity means? Well, I perceive myself as a certain type of person because when I work in this field, this is what this type of person should be like. And this is where we can start to identify rigidity and inflexibility in our thinking processes. It's really, really important to pick that up. Because rigid thinking patterns, guess what? They can cause stress, folks. So do you recognize anything on this screen? Rigid thinking patterns. I have to do it. It's all up to me. Nobody else can help. Is that really the fact? How might that create some level of imbalance? I'm going to fail. We can all doubt ourselves. In fact, it's normal, unless we're completely pathological, to have an internal negativity bias, right? To doubt ourselves, to criticize ourselves. But how can you say you're going to fail? Can you tell the future? I should be able to handle this by now. There's that word, should. There's a construct in cognitive behavioral therapy called cognitive distortions. And part of this is about inflexibility and rigidity in our thinking. Should is a very, very directive and inflexible word. I should be able to handle this by now. Why? Is what you're encountering exactly the same as the last time that you did, or have some of the variables changed? And is everything within your control? So how rigid, how inflexible is that thinking? I don't have enough time. Let me ask you a question. If you had all the time in the world, all of the resource in the world, would you still find things that you wouldn't be able to do? It must be perfect. Must. A rigid and inflexible thought process. Perfection? Does it exist? You might be a 10 out of 10 in your performance one day. What happens the next game you go out, the next time you run track, the next time you perform that operation, or the next time you complete that project? Have the variables changed? Of course they have. You're not the same. You've aged, you've changed. Your experience has changed. The variables change. If it's sport, the weather, the opposition, they're all different. So how can we guarantee perfection? Perfectionism is not something we'll come at today, but it might be something we want to come back to in a future Imatta Live and Interactive. But for now, I would invite you to think, how often do your words contain thoughts and words like must, should, can't, rigid and inflexible words that only create balance if you fulfill them 100%. And guess what? You don't create or you don't hold all of the variables. You don't have access to all of the levers of control in the world. That's just a reality. And why is that important? Well, it's important because of 3 pounds of grey and white matter that live between your ears and my ears, the human brain and the psychological mind. Now, we've all got a brain. My wife sometimes doubts if I engage mine very much, but we've all got one. The thing is, it's slightly different to how we might think. Now, unless you've studied neuroscience, psychology, medicine, you maybe make certain assumptions about the brain. This idea of being stress-free fascinated me when it showed up on that word cloud. Because here's a reality. Being stress-free is virtually impossible. It's what we call in acceptance and commitment therapy, a dead person's goal. It's easier for a dead person to be stress-free than for an alive person to be stress-free. Why? It's our friend here in the middle. You see the little 3 red dots? That's our stress response mechanism, our survival mechanism centered around our amygdala and hypothalamus. It's there to keep you alive. It has access to the array of hormones and neurotransmitters, about 40 in total, that can activate when you experience fight, flight, or freeze. Key stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, course through your body to propel you to action. Now, the thing about it is, this system is brilliant if we're in the fight for our lives. The problem is, it doesn't often differentiate between real life danger and perceived threat and danger. So not everything, thankfully, most of what we encounter in the world now is not life-threatening. However, this system responds exactly the same to a life threat as to potentially the perception of criticism or an unmet need, something which creates imbalance. Now, luckily, we've got this blue system at the front, dorsolateral and ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which can act to dampen down our stress responses. So we can't be stress-free, but we can learn to manage stress. And this is where our blue brain helps us out. It's what we call in psychology executive functioning, our ability to forward think, to plan, to make evidence-based decisions. All of that great stuff comes from this area. And it can help to rationalize and dampen down our stress response. But we need to give it the tools to be able to do that. And for that, what we want to be able to look at are some tools and techniques. Now, just before we do that, I want to bring this paradox of the self to us. How an overplayed strength can be a weakness. Think about it like this. The things that make you, you. The things which create that sense of balance, that make you feel happy, that make you feel on point with who you're being, can also be the very thing that could create the seeds of imbalance, could unpivot you, could create stress. Let's take a couple of examples. I want to be helpful. In fact, I want to be so helpful that I won't say no to people. I end up getting pulled in various different directions. And then I start to feel annoyed and frustrated and taken advantage of. Our strength can all of a sudden imbalance and become a weakness. I want to be diligent. I want to work hard. I want to get up 3 hours before I go to bed. And I want to work 15 different jobs every day and smash them all out of the park. Okay, diligent, good. It validates some of our core intrinsic motivations. Some of our unconscious motivations. Validates all of that. It's brilliant. The only problem is we could end up burning out. I'm so diligent that I don't step back. I'm so diligent that I work hard, so hard that I burn myself out, that I use up every psychological, emotional, mental, and physical resource that I have until there's nothing left. Can I be diligent then when I've got nothing left to give? A strength in balancing to become a weakness? I want to be kind. I want to look after you. And indeed, the research tells us that kindness in leadership is brilliant. It's a really, really productive way to get people functioning and operating at their optimum. However, I don't want to deliver any bad messages, any unhelpful messages, anything that might make somebody feel I'm being unkind. So therefore, I won't challenge you. I won't tell you what you're doing wrong. Is that being kind to the other person, pointing out their mistake, helping them get better? Is it being kind to the other people who are impacted by those mistakes? Do you see the subtlety and the paradox in the self here? This thing, balance, it's a bit more complex than we first thought, isn't it? So, let's do one more Menti, shall we? Let's see if you can identify a strength which, if it's played out in the wrong way, could actually become a weakness or cause imbalance. Let's have a look at that. We'll bring up the Menti now, and then just give you an opportunity to respond. What insight can we develop or see around the room? So we'll switch over to the Menti now, and whenever we pop this question in, it's just this idea of being able to see how might some of our strengths drift into creating imbalances in some potential way. Maybe I've given you some thought processes with those 3 ideas. That idea of being helpful, that idea of being kind, that idea of not challenging others, not saying no, being so diligent that we burn ourselves out. Let's just see what maybe pops up on the screen, shall we? Let's bring that question up. So, what might create some imbalance in terms of our strengths playing out in a different way? I wonder what we might identify. How can we use our level of personal insight, of understanding of this complex topic to get a bit deeper into what's going on with us? Let's see what comes up in the room. Striving to do a great job. Absolutely. So we want to do a good job. We put our energy into it. Actually, we can put so much energy in that we don't have energy for the other things we want. I want to be focused and so determined. If we're focused and determined about one thing, what might we lose sight of? We've got work ethic, wanting perfection. Again, look, striving to be the best we can be is what we call adaptive in psychology. Maladaptive perfectionism is something which can really, really be unhelpful. wanting to strive for more, but leading to work too much and feeling burned out and demotivated. Absolutely, yeah. It's a classic example of who we want to be actually starting to create that imbalance. And where that then sits with the similar drive of wanting to be a good parent at the same time. I want to be a good parent, but I work so much. I feel like I'm not there. How stress-inducing is that? So we've got a few good ideas there. What I'd advise you to do as we go away from this session, please start to build that level of insight. And don't beat yourself up for having these thoughts. Just notice that they're there. They're telling you something. And it can enable us to move forward and start to create solutions. So let's come back in to our PowerPoint. And what we'll do next is explore what we can do to move forward. Because the thing about it is, there are steps we can take. And noticing, identifying our thoughts, identifying the things which do create the push and pull, the imbalance. Those are the things which are really, really key. So not using them as sticks to beat ourselves with, but actually just using it as a platform of deciding what to do next. So we'll come out of the Menti and back in to our PowerPoint. And with that, we'll look at the last couple of ideas that we have for the day. So what can we do? I would suggest, rather than being rigid in our thinking, we want to be flexible. Flexibility brings a whole host, a whole variety of brilliant capabilities. It means that when the stress comes on, we don't break. We can bend with it. Psychological flexibility, what we call an acceptance and commitment therapy, the three components to it, the triflex, consists of being present, being open, and value-led action. So what I want you to think about is we've started to be present, we've started to observe our thinking simply by identifying the things which are causing imbalance, making push and pull demands of us. But you might think, how do I switch my thinking off? It's not about that. It's about changing the focus of our thinking. So what I want you to think about now is your left hand. I want you to focus your attention on your left hand. Mine is sat on the table in front of me. I want you to think about your left hand. Bring your idea, your consciousness, your focus and your attention to your hand as it's sat wherever it is. Maybe on a table, maybe on a chair. Maybe it's against the seam of your clothing or the fabric of your clothing. What can you feel? Does the surface around you feel hard or soft? Does it feel warm or cool? Can you feel any pressure through any particular part of your hand? Is there more pressure in the tips of your fingers than your palm? Does your hand feel comfortable where it's sat? Or do you feel like you want to move it? Go ahead and move your hand now. Bring your hand up and gently and softly close your fingers in, making a fist. Do you get any sensation of pressure? Where do you feel that? As you uncurl your fingers again, what do you feel? What are you aware of? Now, we're short of time today, but that is bringing the idea of mindfulness to hand. Quite literally, because we were feeling and thinking about our hand. It's about being present. It's about the ability to shift our attention. Mindfulness isn't a panacea. It doesn't make stress go away, but it helps us to become aware of what's happening with us in the here and now, to be present. Then we can be open to the experience. So I would suggest when you say, I want to be stress-free, What happens if we still experience stress? It's being open to that being there, but then asking ourselves, what's important here and why? And how do I move forward? What would a kind, what would a helpful, what would a happy version of me do right now? So when we look at this and when we activate our values, the rub here is that that value could take us off in two directions. And it's about identifying a pathway for us in behavioral steps to move forward. And for that, I just want to help you by introducing this little vignette. The Eisenhower matrix, how we map out urgent and important jobs. Think about everything that you've got going on. It all wants to creep into this red box in the corner. It all says, I'm urgent, I'm important, do me now, do it now. Can you do everything now? Or have you got limitations? Do there have to be priorities? Finding balance, folks, is the ability to identify with yourself what you're going to prioritize in the here and now, accepting that actually that will mean some other things have to be deprioritized, planned and scheduled, or identified, and get other people to help you out with it. We have to accept that we cannot be all things to all people all of the time, but we can still be us. So take some time and just identify those aspects which you really need to attend to now, and what else you could move elsewhere. Because here's the thing. When we come to this idea of that 3-word ideal self, that is you. That is you. You are your ideal self. When you're feeling balanced, when you're happy and content, that's you. It's about identifying the bits that create that balance, using the tools that we've explored very gently to help find that. And a big part of that is this. You cannot pour from an empty cup. If you want to be able to give energy, love, diligence, hard work, thought process, whatever it is, to somebody else, you need to have some to give. And that's what Imatta exists for. The entire platform is geared, designed to help you get what you need. Whether that's one-to-one therapy or coaching, whether it's live webinars like this, and we'll be coming back to being live and interactive again soon. So why not look at the Imatta website, see what's there, and find what it is that can help you to fill your cup a little bit, to create some more balance. I'd like to thank you for sticking with us for the last 35 minutes. What we're going to do is we'll take some questions and answers now. I believe we've had some coming in to the laptops here. I'm just going to have a look and see what we've got coming in and then respond to a couple. So there's an interesting one at the bottom. How do you know if you have a balanced life? What does balance mean to you? We are individual and we exist in an individual context. What we need from one day to the next, from 1 year to the next, will be different. And change is an absolute constant. So what creates balance for you in the here and now might shift and change, or it might stay fairly stable. It's about identifying what's important for you. We've seen some similarities in the room today. We've seen some connection between what people need and where they feel the pressure points. But we've also seen that it's different. So what you need might be very different from somebody else. Understand the context. As a psychologist, when I'm working one-to-one with people, I don't come in and say, oh, I know what's going to fix you. Here, do this. It worked for me. I need to understand the context that that person lives in, where they are right here, right now. So spend some time. It's not navel-gazing. It's not being self-involved. Understand what you need to fill your cup. Understand what you need to create that balance. And then think, how do I usefully go about this? Not thinking rigidly, but adopting that psychological flexibility. Hopefully that answers it for you. Let's see what else we've got coming in. There's an interesting one. How would you broach the subject of a poor work-life balance with a manager in work? Good question. Let's think about it like this, shall we? What does the manager want you to do? To do your job, right? Simple enough. In fact, it's pretty self-evident. How do you do your job best? Being as productive and feeling as capable and competent as possible. We've already seen that imbalance is linked to activation of our stress response system. Now, here's the thing. Do stressed people make for the best workers? Is stress conducive to optimum performance? We haven't looked in depth at stress today yet. But when we think about stress, there's a difference from my perspective in terms of pressure, which can help us to perform, and stress, which activates those internal mechanisms and starts to become unwieldy, starts to become that aspect which has a detrimental impact on us. So I would suggest that if your manager wants you to be as productive as possible, to smash it out of the park, to be that best version of you, it's in their interests to help you find balance. If we can frame our conversation with the manager in that way, that this is all about helping me to perform to my very best, do you think that they would get on board with that? You're actually doing them a favour by looking out what you can get the balance with. You're providing the opportunity for you to be even better at your job. Who doesn't want that? Let's see what else we have got coming in. I feel guilty when doing things for myself, like going to the gym or for a walk, or not spending more time working or with my children. Should I feel guilty? Interesting one. Guilt. Does guilt solve anything? Does guilt make the pressure of work, the demands of home life, go away? How do you be the best version of you? What is it that helps you to be the most balanced parent for your kids? That helps you to be the best you can be in that time that you have available? What is it that helps you to be the best version of you at work? Physical energy expenditure. It's really important to a lot of people. Being able to exercise, being able to move. There's some really interesting research about how important blood flow, oxygen, and movement are for the human brain. So being the best version of you, does exercise help you reduce stress? Does exercise help you think better? Do you sleep better when you exercise? Do you feel, bizarrely as it happens, more energy after you exercise? So is exercising, going to the gym, actually facilitating all of the things that you want to be when you're in work, when you're with your kids? I might suggest that it is. Think about it like this. How do you build a house? With bricks and mortar. If the house you want to build is work or family life, what bricks and mortar do you need to put together to make that happen? I want to manage stress. I want to have energy. I want to think more clearly. And exercise helps me do that. Really, it's just about using our Eisenhower matrix to plan it out, to have a bit of thought process, and to think what's important here and why. Why am I doing this right now? And hopefully that can help us to start to let go of that guilt. Let's see what else we've got in there. So, as an employer, what more can I do to help my employees have a better work-life balance? Interesting one. So, getting to know them, getting to understand what they need being interested, being curious, and then being able to identify how do people work best? How do we get the best out of these environments? If we look at productivity, is the most productive thing to have everybody in working 12 hours a day, cancel weekends and cancel holidays? Does that create work-life balance? You'll be perceptive in terms of picking up stress markers. Start to identify, and if you need to, Imatta is a brilliant resource to be able to work with you on this. Start to identify what might be causing the stressors. Start to do some diagnosis. Identify what's creating the imbalance within the workplace. And then it's about being forward thinking. And it's about taking those difficult choices. Some of it might mean a change to operation. Some of it might mean a change to policy and procedure. Key to that is consultation, voices being heard, listening to people and demonstrating that you're listening to it. The other thing, and we haven't touched on this today yet, if you say you're going to create work-life balance, be serious about it. Create trust in that process. Be open and transparent. And follow through on anything that you say you're going to do. The death knell of trust in an organization is if I say something and I do something different. If we say we're going to do it, follow through on it. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it is worthwhile doing. Let's see if we've got one more quick one. So I'm a new mother and I'm struggling adapting to not working or doing enough things for myself, but I don't know how to approach this with my husband. So it's really critical, first and foremost, that you've been able to identify that you have that struggle. What is causing that level of imbalance? I would ask you the question and reflect on this. What's stopping you having a conversation? What's stopping you having that conversation about how you feel, about where your push and pull mechanisms are? It's normal to struggle. It's normal to have a perception of ourselves. I talked about identity. We may have this idealized version, an ideal in our head that a mother must be all of these different things. I would ask you, number one, just to check in with that perception of your identity of yourself. Is it realistic? Or do we need to change and evolve it a little bit to make sure and make some room for the bits that you need? And then identifying what you need. I might suggest that when you have the conversation, you'll be pleasantly surprised with the response that your husband wants to help you to be comfortable, to find balance, because you're both invested in creating the best environment for your new baby. It's not easy. So be kind to yourself. And then let's have a look, see, is there anything else? Well, we're just almost out of time, folks. There's a couple of other questions there, but we don't have time to get into them because we are on a hard stop for 12:50. I hope you found today useful. I hope you have some thought processes, built some knowledge, gained some insight, and maybe taken away one or two small techniques. What I want you to do now is reflect on what we've covered. And if there are still burning questions, come to the Imatta website. Check it out. See all of the resources and the input that we can give you to help you with life. Because guess what? Life's a challenge, and sometimes it's not very fair. I'd like to thank you for your time, for joining me here today, and I look forward to seeing you on our next live and interactive. Thanks.